Yeah, welcome everybody to the MasterMined Club. This is a deep dive technical topic webinar, and we do these around once every month. In between, we do every Friday, we get together as a club for the paying members, and we have kind of an accountability group where we do everything we can to encourage you guys to just keep on building, take the next step to making your industrial scale, commercial scale mining farms. And we purposely look for things like roadblocks to help you to remove them and just really give you the skills and the team and the network to be successful in building your farms. And our goal is really to help you avoid mistakes that we've made, help you to build quickly, efficiently, and more cost effectively than we've done it in the past. Joe Carlasare is going to be talking shortly here. But yeah, so like I was saying, really our goal is to empower the next generation of Bitcoin entrepreneurs and mining professionals. And we want to help you guys to build and efficiently operate your commercial scale Bitcoin mining farms so that you can start mining 1 Bitcoin per month, every month, month after month, in under 90 days. So that seems like a fairly bold statement, but I think with the right guidance and training and team, you can accomplish that. Some of these things that I was telling you about, the MasterMined Club, the Build a Mine Boot Camp, the mining conference, and the Telegram community, it's part of our ecosystem that we're trying to build here, and it's been very successful and it's thriving. Here's some URLs here, and I can come back to this afterwards as well. But 2.tools/build-mine, that's our boot camp, and we have an in-person class coming in July and in September. We'll tell you about more later. In our MasterMined Club, you can find out more here. It's our peer mentorship club. And then our conference as well, the mining conference taking place in September. And then our Telegram communities, you can go to 2.tools/community and find a list of dozens and dozens of Telegram groups where you can learn and share and grow and just really get to know people in the industry. And, one of the issues that we as Bitcoin miners run into are legal issues. We have a lot of questions. Sometimes it's not enough and a little too late, but Joe's going to give you some tips on how to, start thinking about some of these things before you get in trouble, right? And just to protect your assets, your Bitcoin miners, your house, your wife, whatever. So yeah, I'll just let Joe introduce himself and his background, and then he can get right into his presentation. And then I'll go, like I was saying earlier.
Okay. Well, thank you, Scott, for the kind introduction, and thank you, John, as well, for having me on here. It's a pleasure to speak with you all. I love talking with Bitcoin miners. I am a partner in the law firm of Amundsen Davis. I'm also the co-chair of our firm's cryptocurrency, fintech, and blockchain practice group. My firm has been growing rapidly. We're approaching almost 300 lawyers spread throughout the Midwest. We have offices in most Midwestern states. And the real passion of mine is digital assets generally, but really more specifically Bitcoin. I'm a passionate Bitcoiner. I've been involved in Bitcoin space since 2015. I think the asset's still well on its way towards changing the world, and I'm a true believer, so to speak, in it. And my goal for this presentation, as Scott pointed out, is for you to walk away with very clear, concrete, actionable information that you can take and you can use today. Okay. Now, obviously, I can't cover every single legal aspect of Bitcoin mining and everything that may come up in the course of a 30-minute presentation here. But what I can do is I can give you some real practical advice to know how to ask the right questions when you're entering the legal arrangements with others, when you're expanding your business, when you're growing rapidly. And my goal is so that you don't end up in litigation, so that you don't end up on the wrong side of some regulator. That is always my goal for clients. I know that the last thing you want to spend money on is legal resources. Spending money on legal resources, I think, is really valuable. I think it saves you a lot of money in the long run, but you want to spend money on growing your operation and putting money in your pocket, right? So my goal is to avoid you having a headache later on with a very expensive legal dispute. And what I can always tell you, my general advice is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. So if you spend a little bit of time brushing up on some of these principles in advance, hopefully it saves a lot of money in the long run. And that's always my sort of general advice to people. So what is the most important thing I can tell you today? The most important thing I can tell you is that as you're moving fast, as you're breaking things and you're changing, you're growing your business, it's essential that you make contractual relationships with the parties that you're doing business with. Okay. That is a core necessity. And it's amazing to me how so many people in the Bitcoin mining space do a lot of deals, big deals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in some occasions, based on a handshake. That's not good, right? You want to observe corporate formalities. Those are built for a very particular reason. People do that because they want to ensure that their business is protected, that there is clearly defined legal relationships that are enforceable in the event of a dispute. And you may be doing business with somebody, locally, whether it's, getting a lease or even something very basic, and you may say, oh, I trust Jimmy John, he's a good guy. Well, I tell you, I've seen so many disputes with big, small, large mining operations right now that I've represented across the country where they did stuff on a handshake deal and somebody they thought that was their best friend, it all broke down and it cost them a lot of money because there wasn't clear documentation. So what does that mean? That means when you're setting up your entities, you should always do a corporate entity as opposed to doing things in your own name, number one. Number two, you should also always have well-defined contracts. I'm not going to get into how to establish corporate entities in this. There's plenty of good online free legal resources. My firm does it if you want us to help set up a corporation. What I'm going to talk to you about is what I deal with all the time, which is contracts. Contracts are the core of really many business operations. And there are certain essential things you should have in a contract, whether you're drafting it or somebody's giving it to you from the other side. And really the purpose of this is to break down these provisions so that when you read long legalese, you know what the heck they're talking about. That's my goal. And we'll have questions at the end, but let me just go into some of this with respect to Bitcoin mining. So the first element is a contract is supposed to define the scope of work. Now in Bitcoin mining, right, there's a lot of contracts you're going to enter into. Many of my clients enter into contracts regarding the use of land. They enter into contracts regarding electricity. They enter into contracts regarding mining repair work, regarding the purchases of mining. Even if you're not the one drafting it, you need to understand specifically what is called for, what are your rights in and under the contract. And remember, when you're dealing with a vendor, okay, they're going and they write the contract for you. They're going to write it in a way that is advantageous to them, right? They have lawyers that they have spent money on, people like me that have put together a contract and said, this protects our butt. Now, just because someone hands you a boilerplate contract does not mean you have to sign it to do business with them. It is amazing to me how many young entrepreneurs think that when a contract is presented to them, that they don't have any ability to negotiate. Keep in mind, both sides want to enter into the deal, right? It's supposed to be a win-win if you're doing business with someone. So you have the right, even if you're a small operation, to say, I don't like this provision. I want to change what your obligation is relative to mine. You can counterpropose anything under a contract. Just because it's a boilerplate PDF doesn't mean you can't rewrite it. And I have done this with major companies in the Bitcoin mining space. They say, well, we always have this contract. We're not going to agree to amend it. And you say, well, I'm sorry, if we can't get some revisions to this contract to make it more mutually beneficial, I'll have to take my business elsewhere. And that's the core of a good business relationship, willing to give and take and make certain accommodations to serve the interest of whatever your counterparty is. So remember that when you're facing a boilerplate contract, and also remember when you get to propose it, if the other side doesn't have any concerns and they want to enter into a disadvantageous contract for them, as long as you're being clear and transparent about what the scope of work is or whatever you're doing, there's nothing unlawful about that. There's case law that says in every state, a one-sided contract, a bad deal is not an unenforceable deal, meaning that just because they didn't read it and didn't clearly understand who did what, where, when, doesn't mean that the judge isn't going to enforce it as written. This is a business relationship. You're not doing this out of the kindness of your heart. You're trying to make money, and it's your job to be an advocate for somebody. And if you don't want to do it, hire a lawyer to do it. The most important thing I can tell you in a contract is indemnification, in my belief. And the reason for that is, if you are doing business with someone, an indemnification provision protects you against liability. Okay. And what I advise many of my bigger mining clients about is, if they're dealing with certain individuals, a lot of times they will not even question an indemnification agreement. They won't even read the language. They won't even say, wait a second, I'm not even sure what this means. For whatever reason, people all the time agree to indemnify others without even thinking about it or trying to negotiate that. I'm telling you, practical advice tip, okay, on this call. Make sure if you see the words indemnification or defend and indemnify, any variation of those in a contract, you have to be on guard. You have to be on sufficient notice to understand that that means that you're assuming a legal responsibility for another person. Let me explain what that means. When an insurance company enters into an agreement with you in your liability insurance, everybody understands this. Like when you get hit, or someone hits you, or you hit them, either way, your insurance company has an indemnification and defense a liability. What that means is that if someone sues you for an auto accident, your insurance company is going to come in and they're going to indemnify you, meaning pay money over whatever liability you've caused by being negligent while driving your car. The same is true for defense. If you're in litigation, if it says indemnify and defend, that means the insurance company has to go hire you a lawyer and pay a lot of legal expenses on your behalf. Now, what savvy companies that you do business with will do, as you're in the Bitcoin mining space, energy companies, again, land deals, land rights deals, real estate transactions, they'll put in this sneaky little clause about indemnification. And then if they get sued for something they did, they will seek indemnification from you. They will seek you to have to pay for whatever judgment is entered against them, but also whatever defense costs. So even if the other company did nothing wrong, even if your counterparty that you're executing an agreement with did no liability, no negligence, no violation, if they get sued, they could turn and point the finger at you and say, you, Scott Offord, have to pay for my defense because you entered into an indemnification agreement protecting me. So there may be reasons why you want to do that for businesses, but I'm telling you, you should at least consider this. You can propose alternative languages. You could propose split indemnifications. There's a variety of different ways to structure this, and that's what I do, as a lawyer in terms of contracts. But this is really important that when you sign an agreement, if you agree to indemnify someone, you understand the legal liability you are taking on if a lawsuit ever were to arise. I represented a Bitcoin miner, very successful operation. They executed an agreement without thinking on behalf of a energy company. The energy company got sued by the city, okay? And the city then said, they said, you're violating, a bunch of local ordinances, energy company, by providing this space to the Bitcoin miner. And what the the energy company did is they turned over to the miner and said, you agree to indemnify me for the work you're doing on my property and for the work you're doing using my energy. Therefore, you are responsible for all the legal fees. And the legal fees for the energy company, even though the miner wasn't sued directly, were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. So that mining entity ended up going BK. They filed for bankruptcy because of the suit that wasn't even against them. It was against the energy company that was providing them energy. There's a lot of different facts to that case, but where it made sense to file bankruptcy. But it's really important that you understand what this means when it's in a contract. And also, for your own benefit, if you're dealing with other people and entering into agreements, you should try to get that in language in there in your favor, right? You should try to say, whatever delivery person you're dealing business with, whatever landowner you're doing business with, will you agree to indemnify me? You don't even need to ask. You put it in the contract, and if they sign it without thinking in a naive way, then you've bought yourself a legal defense in the event anything bad happens. I'm going to move on from that. The next one is governing law. Okay. Governing law is really important in the contract. Jurisdictions vary quite a bit. I will tell you that what you want to generally do is you want to have a governing law apply for your forum, okay? Unless you're aware of some particular issue, and a lawyer can help you with this, of why you'd want a different governing law apply. If you're in Wisconsin, you should be having Wisconsin law apply. And the reason for that is that Wisconsin law tends to favor Wisconsin residents. That's how it's constructed. You don't want to enter into an agreement where, the law of the Cayman Islands applies, because the law of the Cayman Islands is very different than, Illinois, Texas, Wisconsin. And a lot of crypto companies you're doing business with, they will stick a legal choice of law provision in that applies to their benefit, right? They want a place where you don't have as much due process, where you don't have as much rights, where they don't have to give you as much notice. And most of the 50 states will provide you a lot more of a benefit in terms of governing law than another country. So if you're doing business with a counterparty, try to get your native state or locality's law to apply in a contract. And if you see it in there, propose an alternative. Say, why don't we pick Delaware law, which is very common, that has a lot of corporate, there's reasons like every company is set up in Delaware. It's because Delaware has a lot of protections for folks, and it allows you to get more of a swift resolution of disputes. It's much more cost effective than other jurisdictions. So just think about choice of law when you're entering into a contract. It's an essential element of any decent contract. The next thing, termination and dispute resolution. Now, what is the most expensive aspect of legal work, right? It's always litigation. And Scott and I have talked with this about a lot, and John and I have had conversations too. What I always tell my clients, do what the big boys do. Do what the major companies across the United States, every major credit card company, if you read the terms and conditions when you're executing an agreement for a credit card, they will tell you that every dispute between you and the credit card company has to go to arbitration. What that means is you cannot go file a lawsuit, and they cannot go file a lawsuit. There's a private arbitration process where you go and you resolve your disputes in a lot more efficient way. It's less expensive. You can do it without a lawyer in many respects if you carve that into the agreement. And that's what you want, right? You don't want to get mired in a long, protracted litigation where you may have to go to a different state to testify. It's just a huge distraction from what you're trying to do, which is make money. So again, when you're entering into a legal arrangement, explore the possibility of what is going to happen if there's any dispute that arises. Even a dispute like, what does it mean in the contract? What does a particular term mean? You can put a clause in that says any disputes over the term of this contract or how it's constructed, an arbitrator is going to decide that, and he will decide it within 30 days. And you could write in something like, well, the winner, whoever wins, if it goes to arbitration, has to pay the other side's legal fees. That is an enforceable dispute resolution mechanism. I put it in a ton of contracts. I had a contract with a Bitcoin miner based out of Nevada where we put this in with an energy company. I handled the entire dispute. I had this dispute resolution mechanism, and my client was really concerned because they said, Joe, I don't have the money to pay your fees for this. And I said, don't worry about it. There's a fee shifting provision where if we go forward and we file this arbitration, we'll be done in 2 or 3 months. And all of my fees will be paid for by the energy company because they're in the wrong on this. That gives you tremendous power, right? As even a small actor, having something like a fee shifting dispute resolution that I can get a quick answer from an arbitrator on, as opposed to the court system, which I think you all know takes years sometimes to get you resolution, and it can be very expensive. You also want to include clearly defined parameters of what would happen in the event of a termination of the agreement. We were just talking about, John and I, a clause in a contract where it said, here's how you terminate the agreement, but it doesn't specify what happens to the relationship. Does that mean that they, have to fulfill all their prior obligations? Does that mean they're out of the woods and they don't have any obligation to you once the contract's terminated? So really think about that as you're crafting agreements. Confidentiality. Right, a lot of Bitcoin miners have secret sauce, so to speak. They have abilities to protect confidential information, protect the nature of their operation, how it's set up, what their finances are. You can build that into an agreement so that when you bring in somebody else, whether it's an independent contractor or some other counterparty, it will be safeguarded, meaning they can't go and disclose it. We've had situations in the past with public miners I've represented, large operations, where they'll hire an employee. The employee then will come in, and because we stuck in non-disclosure agreement into their hiring packet, they will ignore that. They'll sign the NDA, and then they'll take whatever they learn about the mining operation. They'll go use it against the company that they had originally hired them. They'll effectively take trade secret, confidential information. They'll go try to steal it and set up their own mining operation, and then they'll try to undercut energy providers or other counterparties and say, just don't stop doing business with Scott. Come work with me, and I'll take a smaller cut. In those situations, we've been successful at litigation, filing affirmative litigation against those folks to stop them, and courts will enforce that. If they take your confidential information about your business practices that they learned on the job while working through you, while you paid them to get educated on how to run a successful mining operation, they'll use it against you. So really think about that as you're putting together your team, and it can apply to contractors too, right? If you hire a contractor, not necessarily an employee, and you want to make sure they're not stealing the secret sauce, so to speak, of your operation, make sure that the contractor signs an NDA. And if they don't, and they're not unwilling to do so, there's a bunch of other people out there that will probably do the work, and you can get one of those folks. So think about those sorts of things. How do I protect the essential elements of my business? Payment terms are obvious. I'm not going to go spend a whole lot of time on it, but again, you want to specify the frequency, you want to specify the amount, you want to specify the method of payment. A lot of mining service contracts that I work with, you may have somebody who invests or enters into an agreement where they're providing payment to your mine, and you're doing all the work and you're mining the Bitcoin for them. Then they get mad, right? They say, well, you're not paying me frequently enough. You're not providing enough information about, the nature of whatever hash rate you have and when the mine's up and ends down. All that should be defined, right? You should have it so that my only obligation is to pay you every 90 days, or vice versa. I only have to pay, they only have to pay me every 90 days. That's the clear thing. If they miss a payment, interest starts charging. You could build in all those things into the contract to make it very advantageous to you. So don't just think, oh, this guy's going to pay me X amount of dollars, which is what most entrepreneurs think about. They think about how much money they're going to bring in. Think about the structure, because cash flow is everything. Cash flow is the life of a business. And if you don't set forth really clear terms on that, including penalties, it's not going to be as beneficial for you. So, this is sort of a general slide of just, how you're putting together these. I think it's really key, again, and I emphasize this, what I said at the beginning, to have a regular communication when you're entering into any agreement. Make sure it's documented, and have it be a negotiation, right? Don't just say, well, here's my offer. Negotiate. Everybody's trying to do business, right? We're trying to get a win-win situation. So define what you want. Don't take the first offer that they make. Try to push back and get something that's more protective of your interests, and be willing to involve a lawyer, right? Like, there are plenty of times where, sometimes you don't want to damage a relationship, and you say, I want a third party. I want Joe or somebody else to come in and try to get this contract in a really solid position for us. The reason you want to do that, I think sometimes, is that you want to stay on good terms, and with the other side. You want to make sure they're a long-standing colleague. And an attorney who's sort of an intermediary is sort of a middleman who can be a little bit more aggressive in advocating on your behalf. There's a reason why every major professional athlete has an agent, right? They have an agent because the agent can be a jerk when they're dealing with the team to try to get a contract. And you don't want to be in that position as the actual player, right? To get into a fight with your future team. You want the agent to advocate on your behalf to try to get you the best deal. So think about that. And what I usually say, and John's heard me say this many times, if you're dealing with something that's getting into the six-figure range, it's crazy to me that you're not going to involve a lawyer or some sort of agent to negotiate and review that. I've seen people put together six-figure deals on a handshake, which just baffles me, because the risk you're taking on in that arrangement is just it's just not worth it. And there's plenty of I think lawyers out there, and I pride myself on this, who can provide this type of service in a very efficient manner. You can come to them and you can say, look, I've got a legal budget of a couple grand here, or even $1,000. And I really want to try to tighten up this contract and get better terms. What can you do for that amount of money? And there will be lawyers, if they're decent, they'll tell you, here's what I can do. That's really all I can, budget for that effort. But I'll absolutely do it, and I'll work within your budget constraints. It surprises me that a lot of clients don't come with clear legal budgets. Now, every single major corporate miner that I represent, they all tell me we have X amount of dollars to spend on this effort. That's it. And most of the time it's an undercut, right? It's going to take more money. I have to tell them then what they want to spend, but at least we have that back and forth, right? Happiness is all about setting expectations, and what you're supposed to do with a contract, you're supposed to set clear, well-defined expectations between the parties. So we haven't talked about this a ton, but I just want to touch on it really here about asset protection. Obviously, you in operating a company, depending on if you have shareholders or have other interested parties in the companies, you have fiduciary obligations, and you really have to be clear about security practices and well-defined custody management. Okay, I've seen miners sued for breach of fiduciary duty because they had a bunch of Bitcoin, and their Bitcoin, the wallets became compromised for a variety of different reasons, and they lost the Bitcoin. That's putting you personally on the hook if that's the way you're operating the business, and that's not a good thing, right? If you're in a role of a fiduciary. So number one, know whether you're in a role of a fiduciary. Number two, make sure you have well-defined asset protection plans. And when I say defined, I mean written down. Okay, it's not enough to say, well, we keep the Bitcoin, in cold storage, and have everybody understand that that's how it works, right? Or we keep it on Coinbase or wherever. That doesn't matter from my standpoint. Like what matters is you have something, if a dispute ever arose, to say, listen, this is our standard operating procedure. We keep it in this wallet on Coinbase. The only people with access to the account are myself and John and Scott. And we also have a lawyer that regularly monitors it to make sure there's no issues with this. Those types of things written down, a formalized process, even if it's a page or two, will go a long way if anything bad ever happens in establishing your good faith in setting up the actual mechanism for how you're custodying the assets. Really important, essential. Same thing with payments. Okay, people accepting payments. It's kind of beyond the scope of this call because we're getting up to the end of time here. But remember, if you're accepting payments in digital currency, there's new regulations that are coming down effective January 1st that are going to say that more than a $10,000 transaction from somebody, whether it's in Tether or USDC or Bitcoin, that is going to trigger a reporting obligation for AML and anti-money laundering and KYC. So if somebody says, "Yeah, I'll send you $20,000 of USDC," you have to file a report now. Okay, it'd be no different if they walked in with $20,000 in cash. You cannot legally take those funds without reporting that obligation and obtaining KYC for whatever that transaction was. So those things are important, right? And you don't want to again run afoul of some regulation that's going to cost a lot of money for your company just because you didn't do it right the correct way in the beginning. So then finally, I'll just mention, what I like to do. I have people that call me all the time and they have just a quick question. I have an open door policy. Okay. So you can get me on the phone. I'm very busy, but if you can get me on the phone, I'll answer your question if I can very efficiently. Okay. And I'm not going to charge you an arm and leg for that, because there's plenty of things I know you need legal services for that I will be happy to charge you for if it's a comprehensive thing. And I like to invite you just to come to me with questions, as long as you're not taking advantage of it or abusing it, because I really want to see Bitcoin mining succeed in the United States. I want to see small and mid-sized miners in particular grow. And like I said, don't think, well, I can't call Joe because it's going to cost a ton of money. Tell me what you have in terms of resources, and I'll find a way to work with you to make sure you're best protected given your finances and just financial situation. If you, for whatever reason, have a more complex question, you can always come to me. We'll set up a time. I bill by the hour, right? Like most legal professionals. I'm happy to help you tell you what the right amount is without gouging you to get the project done. And really, that's my goal. I want to deliver something that is actionable, that you can take away and say, I have a best practice set up. And I want you to understand why, right? One of the things that I think people confuse when you're thinking about legal services, that the goal is for you to understand your legal rights and not to have to go to Joe every single time as you grow your operation. The goal is for you to stand on your own, understand, like in this presentation, I hope it did for you. You understand some basic contract elements and think about those. So as you get bigger and challenges become more complex, then you can come to me. As you move your company from one that has, maybe a few $100,000 in revenue to a few million, maybe you need more of Joe's expertise. And that's how you should think about legal services. It's about growing, it's about contributing to the business operation, and it's about you getting return on your investment in sound legal frameworks to protect your operation.